Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long-term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first-of-its-kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast.
So we've had a lot of people lately reach out to us wanting to know the difference between a slip and a relapse in addiction recovery. So we wanted to address that today.
Why would you need to know that, Mark? Why would you need to know the difference between those?
Why would you need to know the difference?
I'm being totally sarcastic. Yeah, it is pretty crucial. And so, today we're going to be talking about slips and relapses and the difference between them. When we discuss relapses, it's important to start talking, start right off the gate by just letting you know the definition that we have found over the years that works best. Mark and I, we both adopt in our practices the Sexaholics Anonymous definition of sobriety, which more or less has 2 main components to it. The first is that there is no form of sex with self or with others other than the spouse. So that's the first piece of what makes up sobriety. The second component is that there is a progressive victory over lust that is ongoing as one moves through the process. And so we're going to break those 2 down today, talk a little bit about what each one is and how you can take that and use this as a tool in your recovery effort for you individually, for you addicts listening, but also for our wives and in your relationship as well.
Yeah, awesome. So we should talk real quick about the reason why we use this definition, because a lot of times people can look at it and say, well, isn't that rather narrow? Doesn't that give a lot of opportunity for, rationalization and justification and skirting the edge? And yes, those are all good points. So let's talk about why we use that very narrow definition as a benchmark.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to make sure that we are on the same page with that. I'll kind of throw myself in the ring a little bit, but I think a lot of you addicts can probably, get behind this concept. When I was first getting into recovery, the most challenging part, perhaps, of the whole thing, at least at the beginning, was figuring out this exact thing, right? Like, what does sobriety even look like? I worked years ago at a treatment center, and I'll tell you the joke, but there's a reality to it. I worked with chemical addicts who also a high degree of them were struggling with sexual addiction as well. And one day I was meeting with a heroin addict, and he said something pretty telling to me. He said, honestly, heroin was way easier to kick this. And that kind of floored me. And then he expanded into why. And he said, walking around with this, he's like, to be honest with you, it's like I have it's a measurement of heroin. He said, it's like I have an 8-ball of heroin in my pants with me all the time and in my head, right? Everywhere I go. And it is so true, right? This particular addiction is different than others. Um, Acting out is a spectrum when it comes to this. When you're talking about other types of addictions, in most cases, there's a very clear line delineating relapsing versus not. But in this world of navigating lust and ferreting out the unhealthy from the healthy, most guys struggle with the following pattern. For me, what this would look like was, all of those thinking errors that we talk about so often would come into play for me as I would move through the addiction cycle. I would start acting out with something, usually some type of pornography, right? Some sort of triggering material. And my brain would go into justification mode, right? Like it'd be saying, "Hey, this isn't so bad. Like you haven't masturbated. You haven't acted out in other ways yet. Like it's just porn. It's okay." And I would get pulled into that. And as I would narrow in my focus, Mark talks about this often as I moved down the addiction funnel and I became more narrowed on the concept, my brain would kind of play a double standard with me and it would switch roles, right? And it would turn around and it would say, "Well, geez, you've gotten this far. So why not just keep going? I mean, you may as well, right? Like you've basically relapsed. Like, what's the problem?" And for every guy that I work with, that looks a little bit different, but I hear that same thing time and time again. Because when we're in that addict mode and that addict place, as we discuss often, we have become so adept at lying to ourselves in different small subtle ways that for most addicts, by the time they hit our office or come and utilize our services, they're completely unable to really gauge where sobriety ends or begins, or where recovery begins or ends. And when you throw into the mix this whole concept of what is healthy sex versus toxic, it just complicates it even more. So understanding and having something specific to grab onto in this process is absolutely critical for you addicts who are listening. When you're in the thick of the crazy thinking, the crazy making that we talk about in 12 step, and you're not able to see your hand in front of your face accurately because your thinking is so distorted, the way I describe it is when you're in like the chaos, the tornado of that storm, you need something that you can grab onto that can ground you and be able to say, in a concrete fashion, "Yeah, this is bad and I've gotten myself into a bad situation, but I've either relapsed or I haven't, and I can still turn this thing around." Right? So that's an absolute critical piece for it. I think the other part that is so important is that it means it's a means to develop strong, healthy accountability with oneself as well as with one's spouse. As spouses get on the same page in terms of what for the addict is a definition of sobriety, that's where we start to be able to have more accurate discussions that get rid of some of the nebulousness of, for most of the guys I work with, it's, most husbands and wives do that song of dance of like, "So how was today?" "That was a pretty good day." Right? So what does pretty good day mean? Like
Yeah, exactly right.
what does that even mean? It was okay, right? This gives something concrete. And if you guys are both on the same page with whatever you decide to define sobriety as at least for the addict, that's where you're going to be able to have a more clear understanding of when you do check-ins, when you guys are owning things with each other, when you're practicing accountability. But that does not mean necessarily that for a spouse, her definition of sobriety can or even should match up with that.
Yeah. So it's really just it's setting just a clear definition that we both understand as addict and spouse, so that we know what the other is talking about or referring to. So if a guy
Yeah.
says, "Yes, I had a relapse," we know what that means. He either
Yes.
had sex with himself, masturbated, or sex with someone else. Or he says, "I had a slip," and we know what that means, right? All the things that lead up to that place of a relapse.
Yes.
And because we have that definition, it really helps to clear away confusion, and it just gives you a good starting place where you can have a really succinct discussion about what's happening. And
Yes.
that's why I like it.
Now, if you're a wife at this point, because I've had this happen in my office in real time, this is where a lot of wives kind of start to panic a little bit. Because I've had more than one wife say over time, she'll actually like interrupt this discussion and say, "Well, wait a minute. So what are you saying? He can just look at all the porn he wants? Like, what does that mean? Like, it's just a free for all as long as he doesn't masturbate or act out with somebody? Like, he's just good?" And that absolutely is not the case. That's not what we're saying. It's important to recognize that it is absolutely possible, and in most cases it's a necessity, that there are differing definitions in terms of what I regard to be sobriety and good recovery, and that is not going to always match up with my spouse. They coalesce more and they get closer together as you move through the process. But the problem with trying to match those up too early is I have found that it's very difficult, because too often guys will kind of weaponize this definition of sobriety, right? And say, hey, I've been sober, essay definition, for 2 weeks. Where's the sex? Right? Why are
Right.
we having
Yeah.
sex? And likewise, a wife will find herself in a position oftentimes of feeling pressure. Well, I guess he's been sober, so I guess I should, and that's a whole other discussion. But it's important for you wives to recognize that simply because your husband is sober, quote unquote, by this definition or by any other for that matter, that does not in any way mitigate or dictate how traumatizing, how that impacts you. Right. Your brain is not going to listen to that and be like, well, I guess we should be less traumatized today because after all, he is 2 weeks sober and he just looked at porn. So it's not as big of a deal.
Yeah.
Um, it's
Yeah. It
important that
doesn't mean that slips are not traumatizing. They
yeah.
absolutely are.
Yes.
And that's not, we're not trying to say that they don't matter. They do. But this clear definition can help us, number one, help the addict realize that if he gets to a certain point, all is not lost and he can just, I might as well go all the way. Well, that's not true, right? And it also is very important to realize for him to start to pay attention to what are the things that lead me to that place of relapse. I
Yes.
need to start to pay attention to all the various factors, the emotional triggers. Am I neglecting my self-care? Am I not being vulnerable and authentic and connecting? Right. And we could go on, dozens of things that he can be engaging in that lead him down the path to a full relapse. And he and the
Absolutely.
spouse need to understand what those things are so that they can work together to see them and to be honest about them and to put healthy things in place that interrupt that process. But that doesn't mean that those things he's doing leading to a relapse are not hurtful, that they don't
Absolutely.
cause pain, because they do. And that's just reality.
And they do damage the relationship. It
They
isn't just
do.
pain, right? They
Mhm.
do impact recovery. They are still setbacks. And so it's important for you addicts listening to understand, because we've got that old brain inside of us. I have said this definition to guys before, and the Charlie Brown's mom effect comes into play. And it's like, ba, 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 you can do anything but masturbate. Ba, 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 like, and you just, all we hear is like, oh, so I can go to absolutely not. Right? Sobriety is not recovery. Sobriety is a part of recovery. But simply just being sober, as far as like a definition like this goes, does not in and of itself say that I am in recovery. It is simply just a tool among many to help gauge the overall progress. Right?
Right. And be very careful, guys, because we can easily get into the place where we walk the razor's edge. Well, as long as I didn't masturbate, I'm good. As long as I didn't have sex with someone, it's not a problem. And you'll find your addict brain starts to go into this place of rationalization and justification, right? I can get right up to the edge. And as long as I don't go over the edge, I'm sober. I'm in recovery. Right?
Yes.
And how many times do we do that in our own
Oh my gosh.
recovery years? Constantly. So for me, a big word for all of you listening, it's about intention. What
Yes.
is your intention? Are you just playing the system and going through the motions and giving lip service to all of this as long as you don't masturbate or have sex with someone? And so are you trying to justify all that, or are you genuinely in your heart trying with all your worth to try to be in this progressive victory over lust?
Yeah.
I'm making adjustments in my life. I'm recognizing the places where I'm falling down and I'm skirting the edge, and I'm trying to make adjustments and do better. And I'm engaging with my spouse and being honest about that.
Yeah.
The ways that I'm slipping, the ways that I find myself falling back into old habits or patterns, and I recognize them, and I have a really powerful desire to begin to correct those things rather than just always getting up to the edge but not going all the way and thinking that that's recovery and healing.
And it's important that we're being accountable for those, where we're at individually on any given day or even during the day at any given time. But that progressive victory over lust, that is going to look like an upward sloping curve with slips. If you are working a good program, if you are, be it with 12 step and with therapy and with other resources, if you're working a good program, your slips will decrease and become less frequent and less severe. If
Yep.
that isn't happening, something is off in the plan and we need to make some significant changes. And so here again, you can see how this is a really good tool and a necessary tool to be able to actually help one to gauge, again, are we making progress with this, right? Are we really changing? Are there things that are happening? Is there something that's measurable, right? And that's and when you take that and you incorporate that into accountability with a partner, with a sponsor, with your therapist, with us, whoever it is, it helps to dial up that process in a way that I have never seen anyone be able to do without a concrete definition, because this was probably, for me, speaking to myself, this was the biggest barrier to getting into recovery, honestly. That and denial. But like I found myself so defeated, right? There was that slippery slope of like where my brain's like, oh, it's no big deal, it's no big deal, it's no big deal. And then it would switch to, well, you're screwed. So go ahead, you know? And I could never find that middle ground of figuring out if I was, you know, uh, making progress or not, or was I changing or not, because it would always inevitably end in a full on relapse. And this gives us something to be able to gauge in real time and say, yeah, there have been slips and whatever else, up to this level, but I am either sober by a given definition, a concrete definition, or I'm not.
Yeah. And it takes time. Know that it'll be difficult at first. It takes time for the addict brain to rewire, for dopamine systems to return to normal. And so be patient with each other and just know that if it's progressive, you're on an upward trend and you're working at it. The definition of slips will change over time to where you become more sensitive to those slips. You start to look at the little things, and over time you'll get it. And so we encourage you to talk about this, talk with each other as a couple about this definition of slips and relapses, discuss where that is for you and
Yes.
how you're going to be accountable, and check in, with each other about what's going on, and you'll get there.
Absolutely. It is a pattern, it is a process. And as we say often, it's progress, not perfection. But this is just one tool in a system that can be used to gauge progress, to create, to open up discussion, right? To take some of the detective work out of those check-ins that so many wives tell us that they get tired of going through playing investigator, right? That whole, okay, so good day, bad day. And like you go through this 10-minute process of finally dialing into, okay, yes, this is what I did today versus not. So we can help kind of catalyze past all that if we can, as we're able to get on the same page with what these things mean, at least to the addict, and then we go from there. Awesome. Have a great week, everybody. Take care.
Hey everybody, Mark and Steve here. Are you looking to take your recovery and your marriage to the next level?
We work with individuals and couples one-on-one.
With both in-person and online therapy options, you have access to the experts anytime, anywhere.
To learn more, visit us at pbscpodcast.com. Everything expressed on the PBSC podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.